The house is mine. I've been planning for this for years. You were just too blind to see it, sweetie. My mother's words hung in the air like poison gas as I stared at the foreclosure notice in my hand. The paper trembled between my fingers, not from fear, but from a rage so deep it made my bones ache. The Cedar Falls morning light filtered through my kitchen windows, the windows I'd installed myself last summer. Outside, the Nebraska sky stretched vast and unforgiving, much like the woman sitting across from me at my breakfast table. My breakfast table in my house. The house that, according to this notice and my mother's triumphant smile, wouldn't be mine for much longer. What did you do? I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I expected. Mom took a delicate sip of the coffee I'd made her, pinky extended like she was at some country club instead of my modest kitchen in a town most people drove through without stopping. Her blonde hair, dyed to hide the gray that might make her look like the 58-year-old woman she was, caught the sunlight as she tilted her head. I did what any smart parent would do, Ellie. I protected my investment. My investment. The words scraped against my eardrums. I'd heard variations of this phrase my entire life. My mother had never viewed me as a daughter. I was a project, a possession, an extension of herself that never quite measured up to specifications. This is my house, I said. I've made every payment for 5 years. With money I loaned you for the down payment. Her smile widened, showing too many teeth. Check the paperwork, dear. I was a co-signer, and I've been documenting your, let's call them financial indiscretions. The familiar weight of shame pressed down on me. I'd struggled after my divorce from Ben, yes. Missed a couple payments last year when the library cut my hours. But I'd caught up. I'd worked nights at Denny's off Highway 30, picked up weekend shifts shelving books, eaten ramen for weeks until I was back on track. There haven't been any foreclosure warnings, I said. Nothing from the bank. Mom waved her hand dismissively. That's because I've been handling everything. Intercepting the mail, making minimum payments when necessary, building a case. She leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. The collection agency calls go to my number, not yours. I've been very thorough. Of course she had. Patricia Winters didn't do anything halfway. She'd spent a lifetime meticulously constructing the perfect narrative. Community volunteer, church treasurer, devoted single mother who sacrificed everything for her ungrateful daughter. No one would believe that behind closed doors, she wielded guilt like a scalpel, cutting away at my independence until I was too weak to function without her approval. Why? I asked. Why now? Her eyes hardened. Because you're drifting again, Eleanor. That community college course? The creative writing nonsense? You're 42 years old. It's time to be realistic. I can't keep watching you make mistakes. The real answer hung unspoken between us. I'd started saying no. Started building boundaries. Started a savings account she didn't know about. And Patricia Winters couldn't tolerate independence in others, especially not from her daughter. Get out, I said quietly. Excuse me? Her eyebrows shot up, perfectly penciled arches of disbelief. Get out of my house. I stood up, steadier than I'd felt in years. She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Your house? Weren't you listening? This will be my property within 30 days. And you'll be right back where you belong. In the guest room of my home, under my roof, following my rules. I didn't respond, just walked to the front door and held it open. The spring air rushed in, carrying the scent of the lilacs I'd planted along the walkway. Mom gathered her purse, taking her time. You'll come around, she said, pausing in the doorway. You always do. You can't survive without me, Ellie. We both know that. As her Lexus backed out of my driveway, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I did something I should have done 20 years ago. I called a lawyer. The phone book was dusty. Who used phone books anymore? But I didn't trust my computer. Not after what Mom had said about intercepting things. I flipped through the yellow pages, my finger running down the list of attorneys. Most had full-page ads, glossy photos of men in expensive suits standing in front of bookshelves. I kept turning pages until I found a simple listing. Hernandez Legal Services, Family Law, property disputes, reasonable rates. The office was above a laundromat in the less polished part of Cedar Falls. A bell jingled when I pushed open the door, and a woman with salt and pepper hair glanced up from behind a desk stacked with folders. "I need help," I said simply. "My mother's trying to take my house." She didn't look surprised, just nodded toward the chair across from her.
"I'm Marcia Hernandez."
"Sit down and tell me everything." I did. The words poured out, not just about the house, but about the years of control, the subtle manipulation, the way my mother had positioned herself as essential to my survival. Marcia took notes, interrupting occasionally with sharp questions that cut through the fog of doubt my mother had created. "Bring me everything," she said when I finished. "Bank statements, mortgage documents, tax returns, emails, texts. Anything with your mother's name on it. Anything about the house." "Some of it's at her place," I admitted. "She keeps all the important documents." "Of course she does." Marcia's mouth quirked slightly. "Bring what you have. We'll figure out the rest." Marcia Hernandez didn't look impressed as I spread my financial documents across her desk 3 days later. Her office smelled of coffee and paper, with cheap blinds cutting the sunlight into thin strips that fell across the worn carpet. "Your mother's been busy," she said, examining the foreclosure notice. "But something doesn't add up here." "What do you mean?" "The timing is off. These payment delays." She shuffled through the papers, her dark eyes narrowing. "When's the last time you actually saw your bank statements?" "I check my account online. The mortgage payment comes out automatically." Marcia leaned back in her chair. "But do you receive paper statements? Do you check the actual mortgage balance?" The shame crept back in.
"No."
Mom offered to handle the paperwork after my divorce. She said it was too stressful for me, that I wasn't in a good place mentally. The words tasted sour coming out. I let her. Marcia didn't judge, just nodded. "I'd like your permission to request all records directly from the bank and the county. Something tells me your mother has been planning this for more than a few months." I signed the release forms, feeling a strange mix of dread and relief. After years of fog, the air was finally clearing, even if what emerged wasn't pretty. "While we wait for those records, I want you to do something," Marcia said. "Document everything. Every conversation, every text, every interaction with your mother going back as far as you can remember. I want dates, times, witnesses if possible." "You think we can fight this?" She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed slightly. "I think your mother believes she's the only one who knows how to keep receipts. Let's prove her wrong." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh notebook and a glass of wine. The house creaked quietly around me as I began to write. At first, the memories came slowly, careful, cautious, like they were afraid of being dismissed. Then faster, a flood breaking through a dam. Age 7. Mom throwing away the drawing I'd made for Dad, saying he wouldn't want childish scribbles when he visited. He never came. Age 16. Mom accidentally reading my diary, then using its contents to convince me my best friend Samantha was talking behind my back. I didn't speak to Sam for months until I learned the truth. Age 24. Mom talking me out of the job offer in Chicago. "You're not ready for a big city, sweetheart. You've always struggled with change." Age 36. Mom arriving unexpectedly during my anniversary dinner with Ben, sobbing about chest pains that mysteriously disappeared once the evening was ruined. Age 39. Mom offering to help after Ben left, gradually taking over my finances, my home, my decisions. "You're too emotional right now to think clearly." By midnight, I'd filled 18 pages with incidents large and small. A pattern emerged, clear as day now that I could see it from a distance. She needed me dependent, needed me broken. My successes threatened her. My independence was her failure. I went to bed exhausted, but somehow lighter, like setting the memories on paper had lifted their weight from my shoulders. My mother left 3 voicemails that week. I played them for Marcia on my next visit. "Ellie, this silent treatment is childish. Call me back." "Eleanor, I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Miller to discuss your anxiety medication. I'm concerned about your mental state. It's your mother. The bank needs you to sign some paperwork. I'll bring it by tomorrow." Don't make this difficult. Marcia's office now contained 2 bankers' boxes labeled Winters. One held my records, painstakingly organized bank statements, tax returns, check stubs, and utility bills. The other contained something that made the lawyer smile grimly when it arrived via courier. "Your mother made a mistake," she said, laying out a stack of papers. "She assumed you would fold like you always have. She didn't expect you to fight, so she got sloppy." The documents showed a pattern. For 5 years, my mortgage payments had been made, not from my account as I believed, but from a joint account my mother had created without my knowledge. She'd been diverting funds, manipulating balances, creating artificial shortfalls, and then rescuing me by making payments from her own accounts. "She's been building this case for years," Marcia explained, "setting you up to look financially irresponsible while positioning herself as the savior. The foreclosure isn't from the bank, it's from her. She's claiming you defaulted on private loans she made for the mortgage. But I never missed payments. I never took loans from her after the down payment. According to these documents, you did." Marcia pointed to a series of loan agreements bearing what looked like my signature. "She's been forging your name, creating a paper trail of debt that doesn't exist." The realization hit me like a physical blow. All those times she'd brought important mail for me to look at. All those documents she'd asked me to sign when I was distracted or tired. "Just insurance forms, sweetie. Just updating your car registration, dear." "Is this enough?" I asked. "To stop her? It's a start. But we need more. We need to prove intent." I thought about my mother's house, about the meticulously organized study where she kept decades of records, about the filing cabinet that was always locked, that I was never allowed to touch even as a child. "I think I know where to look," I said. Breaking into my childhood home wasn't necessary. My mother had never changed the security code, my birth date, because you'll never forget it and neither will I. The ultimate guilt trip embedded in a 4-digit number. The house in Westfield Acres, the wealthy subdivision 20 miles outside Cedar Falls, was silent and immaculate. Family photos lined the hallway, carefully curated images of a smiling mother and daughter. Vacations we'd enjoyed, graduations she'd paid for, holidays where she'd been so generous. The narrative of our lives, edited for public consumption. I moved through the house like a ghost, past the formal living room no one was allowed to sit in, past the kitchen where I'd learned that nothing I cooked would ever be quite right, up the carpeted stairs to the study. The filing cabinet was exactly where it had always been, tucked into the corner near the window that overlooked the backyard. I tried the handle, expecting it to be locked, surprised when it slid open smoothly. Another sign of her overconfidence. The folders inside were labeled with familiar precision: Eleanor, Education; Eleanor, Medical; Eleanor, Financial. I pulled them all, not taking time to read, just shoving them into the backpack I'd brought. Then I spotted another section, hidden behind the others, labeled simply Contingencies. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. A power of attorney form with my forged signature. Medical reports, some real, some obviously fabricated, suggesting I suffered from anxiety disorders and depression that impaired my judgment. Letters from her friends, prominent community members, expressing concern about my stability. A complete roadmap for having me declared incompetent if I ever truly challenge her control. I photographed everything, then carefully replaced the files. As I turned to leave, I noticed her computer was on, the screen displaying her email inbox. An open message caught my eye from her attorney, dated 2 days ago. "Patricia, proceeding with a competency hearing as discussed. Judge Wilson has agreed to expedite given your concerns about Eleanor's deteriorating condition. Suggest minimal contact until scheduled date, May 15th. Walter. May 15th. 2 weeks away." She wasn't just trying to take my house. She was trying to take my life. I forwarded the email to myself, then slipped out of the house as quietly as I'd entered, the weight of decades of manipulation heavy in my backpack. The drive back to Cedar Falls felt surreal. Fields of early corn stretched out on either side of the highway, green and promising in the spring sunlight. Farmers on tractors raised hands in casual greeting as I passed, unaware that my world was crumbling and rebuilding simultaneously. I pulled over at the scenic overlook where the Elk River curved below the bluffs. This had been my thinking spot since high school, the place I came when my mother's control became too suffocating. I'd sit on the weathered wooden bench, watching the water flow beneath me, dreaming of being carried away to someplace new. Now I sat in my car, phone in hand, scrolling through the photos I'd taken. Each image was another brick in the wall of evidence against the woman who'd given me life, then spent decades trying to control it. The weight of what I was about to do pressed against my chest. Was I really prepared to destroy my mother? I closed my eyes, remembering the email about the competency hearing, remembering the forged medical reports, remembering decades of manipulation, gaslighting, and control. Yes, I was. I started the car and headed for Marcia's office. She's going to lose everything, Marcia said simply when I showed her what I'd found. Not just this case. Her reputation, possibly her freedom. We sat in her office a week later, surrounded by evidence of my mother's schemes, not just against me, but against others. The contingencies file had contained dirt on half the town's prominent citizens, insurance policies against anyone who might challenge her. Financial records revealed misappropriated church funds, tax fraud, and identity theft spanning decades. What do we do now? I asked. We could go to the police, Marcia said. The forgery alone is a felony. The identity theft, the financial fraud, she could face serious charges. The thought made me pause. Despite everything, some small, conditioned part of me still hesitated at the idea of sending my mother to prison. Marcia seemed to read my expression. Or we could handle this more strategically. Make sure she never bothers you again without necessarily involving criminal charges.
How?
We use her playbook against her. We build our case, gather our allies, and wait for the right moment. Marcia's smile was thin and sharp. Your mother has scheduled a competency hearing for May 15th. Let's make sure she's the one who gets evaluated instead. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Marcia worked her contacts, arranging quiet meetings with people my mother had manipulated or betrayed. I organized evidence, prepared statements, steeled myself for the confrontation to come. Each night, I returned to an empty house that no longer felt like mine. I'd walk through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, the books I'd collected, wondering if I'd have to start over somewhere else even if we won. So much of this place was tainted now by my mother's interference. On the third night, something changed. I was cleaning out my junk drawer, a small act of reclaiming my space, when I found a paint swatch card I'd saved when I first bought the house. The color was called New Beginnings, a soft blue-green that I'd eventually used for the kitchen walls. I'd been so proud, so hopeful then, even with my mother's criticisms ringing in my ears. I ran my fingers over the kitchen walls, the color I'd chosen despite her insistence that it was too dark, too cold. They weren't. They were perfect, peaceful and calm, exactly what I'd wanted. This was my house, my life, and I wasn't going to let her take either. My mother called twice more that week. I didn't answer, but I saved the voicemails. Eleanor, your silence is concerning. I've spoken with Dr. Miller about having you evaluated for depression. This isn't healthy behavior. Ellie, honestly, this is ridiculous. The bank needs these papers signed. I'm coming over tomorrow at 2. Be there. She arrived precisely at 2 p.m., letting herself in with a key I hadn't known she had. I sat at my kitchen table, calm and prepared, a recorder hidden in my pocket. This childish behavior stops now, she announced, dropping a folder onto the table. Sign these. I didn't touch the papers. What exactly am I signing, Mom? Just some refinancing documents. The bank needs them to process everything. Everything meaning what, exactly? The foreclosure you engineered? Or the competency hearing you've scheduled for next week? Her face flickered, surprise quickly masked by narrowed eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm trying to help you. Your financial situation is completely stable, I interrupted. I've never missed a mortgage payment. Ever. That's not true. I have documentation. Forgeries, I said calmly. I have the real bank records. and copies of emails between you and your attorney about having me declared incompetent. The mask slipped entirely then, her face hardening into something ugly and familiar, the expression she'd worn behind closed doors throughout my childhood. You've been in my house? My private files? Her voice rose. That's breaking and entering. I could have you arrested. For using the code you gave me? For accessing files about myself? I don't think that would go as well as you imagine, especially once a judge sees what you've been planning. She changed tactics instantly, tears welling in her eyes. Ellie, I don't know what's gotten into you. I've only ever wanted what's best for you. After everything I've sacrificed. Stop. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Just stop. The guilt trips don't work anymore. You ungrateful little. She caught herself, visibly composing her features. You're not well, Eleanor. You're paranoid, making accusations. This is exactly why I've been concerned. I shook my head. I have proof, Mom, of everything. The forged documents, the diverted funds, the fake loan agreements, the church money, all of it. Something flickered in her eyes, the first genuine fear I'd ever seen there. What do you want? I want you out of my life. Completely. She scoffed. Don't be dramatic. I'm your mother. Yes, you are. And you used that position to manipulate and control me for 42 years. It stops now. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think you can threaten me? I built this town, Eleanor. No one will believe you over me. No one. I smiled then, and she flinched. That's where you're wrong. People are already listening. The church treasurer, for instance, was very interested in those financial discrepancies. And Janet Wilson, the judge's wife, was fascinated by what you've been saying about her husband in those emails. It was a bluff. I hadn't shown anyone but Marcia the evidence yet, but my mother's face drained of color. She knew which secrets she'd kept, which people she'd betrayed. You wouldn't dare. I already have. Another bluff, but a convincing one. You have two choices. Walk away now from me, from my house, from all of it, or I release everything. Every scheme, every betrayal, every dollar you've stolen. You destroy your own mother? Her voice trembled with genuine shock.
No.
I'd defend myself against someone who tried to destroy me. There's a difference. She stood abruptly, gathering her papers. This isn't over, she hissed. It is, though. You just don't know it yet. The next week was the longest of my life. My mother didn't come back to the house, but I changed the locks anyway. I received a series of increasingly frantic texts, first threatening, then cajoling, finally begging. I saved them all without responding. The night before the competency hearing, I sat on my front porch watching fireflies rise from the grass. A car slowed as it passed my house, and I tensed, recognizing my mother's Lexus. It paused, then continued down the street, taillights disappearing around the corner. I went inside and packed a small overnight bag, not knowing how the next day would end. My hands trembled slightly as I folded clothes, placed my toothbrush in its travel case, tucked my journal into the side pocket. For 42 years, I'd lived my life according to my mother's expectations, her demands, her needs. Tomorrow, whatever happened, that would end. I slept better than I had in years. The competency hearing never happened. When my mother arrived at the courthouse on May 15th, it wasn't to testify about my mental state. It was to face the church board, Judge Wilson, and 3 other prominent citizens who had received carefully curated evidence of her schemes. I wasn't present for that meeting. I didn't need to be. Marcia attended as an observer and reported that my mother aged 10 years in those 2 hours. The consequences came swiftly. She resigned from the church treasury. She sold her house in Westfield Acres. She agreed to Marcia's terms, a complete severance of all financial ties, a legal document acknowledging my house was fully mine, and a binding agreement to have no contact with me unless initiated by me. There were no criminal charges. I couldn't bring myself to go that far, but her careful, curated reputation lay in ruins among the people whose opinions she valued most. I received only one message from her after everything was settled. A text sent at 2 a.m. on the day she left town. I only wanted to protect you. I didn't respond. Some lies don't deserve acknowledgement. 6 months later, I sat on my back porch watching the Nebraska sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. My garden stretched before me, tomatoes heavy on their vines, zinnias bright against the fence, honeybees drifting lazily between late summer blooms. Inside, papers for my fall semester classes sat on the kitchen table. Not just creative writing now, but business courses too. The library had promoted me to assistant director, with a salary that meant no more Denny's shifts. Sometimes I thought about my mother, wondered where she'd gone after selling her house. Florida, according to the realtor's gossip, as far from Nebraska as she could get. Some days the old guilt tried to creep back in, the conditioned response to decades of manipulation. But those moments came less frequently now. I'd repainted the living room last month, a warm terracotta that made the evening light glow against the walls. Hung art I'd chosen myself, arranged furniture in ways that made sense to me rather than conforming to some magazine-perfect ideal. Small acts of reclamation, of making this space truly mine. The neighbor's cat, a scraggly orange tabby named Rusty, had taken to visiting my yard in the evenings. He'd slink through the fence slats, prowl importantly around the garden, then settle on the porch steps to watch the sunset with me. Tonight, he perched beside me, purring softly as I scratched behind his ears. You can come and go as you please, I told him. No strings attached. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcia. Annual account review tomorrow? Lunch after? I smiled, typing back. Perfect. Bringing cookies. Setting down the phone, I picked up my notebook instead. The words flowed easily these days. Stories about women finding their strength, breaking free, building something new from the ruins of the old. The house around me was quiet, my space, my life. No one controlled it but me. No one ever would again. The paper trail my mother had so carefully constructed had led not to my downfall, but to hers.
And to my freedom.
Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways, I wrote in my notebook as the last light faded. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply walk away.